Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa.
And I'm Steph.
And together we are PD Connect.
Connect.
We are excited to have our guest speaker series this month with our very own Jerry Hurtubise. He's going to be talking about this beautiful book that we have in front of us, in front of you. Hopefully you've gotten a chance to take a look at it. But Steph is going to read a little intro, and then we're going to hand it over to Jerry.
Exactly. First and foremost, we are PD Connect. We already said that, but we teach exercise and education for people with Parkinson's. You're at our speaker series. We're thrilled to have you. We're even more thrilled to have Jerry and his lovely book that he's going to be talking about. So a little bit about
And
Jerry.
his groupie.
And his groupies. All of you, thank you for being here. A San Francisco trial attorney, Jerry Hurtubise, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease 10 years ago and embarked on a quest to utilize his extensive knowledge from litigating head trauma cases to explore effective methods for managing his disease. Jerry's journey led him to identify the crucial role of vigorous aerobic exercise and a brain-healthy diet in mitigating the effects of Parkinson's. Now, this bio goes on for maybe about 20 more minutes. And so we've got a lot more to talk about, and we want to open that up to Jerry. Jerry, thank you so much for being here with us.
And let's talk about your Parkinsonian Democracy.
Thank you for the opportunity to present. I really appreciate it. And I should start by saying that my views expressed, although I'm part of the PD Connect community, are probably best defined as exclusively my own and doesn't reflect PD Connect. And any advice that any perceived advice should be checked out with a doctor and supervised by a medical person. And I apologize for this shamefully self-serving disclaimer, but it's a legal thing that I have to do in order to feel assured that nobody else is going to be liable except me. And, you know, Steph and Lisa talked a little bit about my background. I'd like to go back even further, back to South Bend, Indiana, where I was born and raised. Went to high school in Marion High School in Mishawaka, Indiana. Went to college at Loyola University in Chicago, and was corrupted by the Jesuits willingly, the Chicago Jesuits. And they taught me quite a few things about a lot of various parts of life. One thing that they taught me was that if you're feeling blue, go out and help somebody less fortunate, and that'll take care of your depression. And they also taught me to think with my rational brain. And after college, I went to the Medill School of Journalism for a while. And what I came away from that experience learning was that we should always focus on the why question. Very few journalists focus on the why question. And after that experience, I was a union organizer for the United Farm Workers Union, where I attempted to lessen the human suffering of the farm workers in California, which led me to law school. And I went to law school at the University of San Francisco. And out of the experience of law school, I went to the city attorney's office in San Francisco, and ended up there for 4 years litigating. I was on a complex litigation team and was very instrumental in helping defend Mayor Feinstein at the time and defend the rent control ordinance for San Francisco. And then another city attorney and I left and started our own practice and ended up litigating brain injury cases. I mean, that's the punchline for my background, is just to give you an idea of how important it was for me to litigate brain injury cases, because when I was not diagnosed with Parkinson's, it was a bummer, pure and simple. But it was also fascinating because I had the experience of litigating brain injury cases and felt like I was a step ahead of other people who was diagnosed with Parkinson's because I understood the brain somewhat. And litigating also meant doing a lot of work with juries. And I learned very early on that what is said in the first 5 minutes of a presentation on an opening statement is usually what is remembered. So I'll end with the punchline. And after my experience litigating brain injury cases, doing the research for my book, Parkinsonian Democracy, and having the clinical experience of Parkinson's, I realized that the only thing that matters to me, and maybe to other people, is one particular goal that we should have. And that should be our main objective, and that is to keep brain cells alive. And what I'd like to do is begin the presentation by reading from the premise of my book to give you an idea of where I'm going. The book is entitled Parkinsonian Democracy, which means freedom to take personal responsibility over your own health. And the preface of the book starts by saying, we learn from an early age that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, such as life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what never seems to get equal attention is that in order to maximize the benefits of these lofty ideals, we each have also been given the freedom to gravitate toward and activate the rational part of the brain, designed for the purpose of making the best decisions. At this stage of our evolution, it seems to have become part of the human condition for many of us to opt out of using the smartest part of our brain, the frontal lobe, to address life-changing issues, and instead choose to do much of our thinking from other, less enlightened parts of the brain, which may simply be fertile breeding grounds for fear, prejudice, and unhealthy addictions. Turning the page very slowly because I've got Parkinson's. I became aware of the phenomena of what is referred to as competing areas of the brain while litigating head trauma cases, where it became clear that when a person suffered a devastating injury to the frontal lobe, it did not mean he or she stopped thinking, but rather that it often meant he or she would end up having to process thought from other less rational parts of the brain designed for other purposes. The good news for most of us who have been diagnosed with Parkinson's is we still have the choice of taking full advantage of using our prefrontal cortex to fully assess the advantages of moving towards a medical model that incorporates the critical role, the critical role diet and exercise play in the remedial equation, and as I will argue, the challenges of relying solely upon prescription medications as an exclusive remedy. In order to achieve all the benefits of taking for what some may be seen as the path of most resistance, it will be necessary to unpack some of what science has discovered about the human brain over the last century, not the least of which is the notion that decision-making regarding important matters, such as how to domesticate a progressive brain disease, is best understood from the vantage point of the rational part of the brain. Assume for the sake of argument that this is true, then it also stands to reason that whether we become healthy or unhealthy, or for that matter, love or hate, evolve or devolve, have character or simply become characters, be prophets or profiteers, will in large part depend on which particular competing area of the brain we choose to end up using. If, for example, we condition ourselves, or probably more likely allow ourselves to be conditioned, to generate most of our thought from our anger, fight, or fear flight centers of the amygdala, rather than from the part of the brain intended for processing rational thought, the prefrontal cortex, or from the part intended to appreciate the consequences of behavior, the orbital frontal cortex, it should come as no surprise that where we choose to process thought will greatly influence the choices we make. Indeed, the evidence will show it is critical from the get-go to streamline an unencumbered pathway to the rational brain without being bogged down by such things as anger or guilt. The evidence then to be offered in the following legal fiction, timely filed in the United States District Court of Public Opinion, will show that depending upon which competing area of the brain we gravitate to activate, it may very well determine how we react to our being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and thus decisions yet to be made may very well affect the quality of, turning page, our lives, and more importantly, the quality of lives of those whom we love. To that end, it is strongly advised that exclusive neurological jurisdiction in all matters in which thought is processed should be discharged at or near the prefrontal cortex, what will become known as the only highly evolved part of the brain, having the aptitude and judicial temperament necessary to solve any problem, especially if fear, prejudice, or an unhealthy addiction with malice aforethought attempts to control the narrative. If the following experiment is allowed to run its course, we more likely than not will in the end not only be able to see more clearly how the aforementioned obstacles prevent us from achieving our optimal health physically, but also how these impetuous suspects conspire to prevent us from achieving our optimal mental and spiritual health as well. With that in mind, let us all rise to the occasion. And the trial takes about as long as it takes you to read the book. And what seems to make sense to me, what seemed to make sense to my prefrontal cortex when I was diagnosed with Parkinson's, is that the symptoms of Parkinson's are simply a cry for help. And I was left with the charge of trying to determine what or who was crying for help. And I suddenly determined that it was the brain cells that are crying for help. That's why I don't think in terms of fighting the disease, because I'm just realizing that brain cells are crying for the help necessary to keep them alive. And I'll come back to that particular point over and over again, that the most important thing that we should remember in the treatment of Parkinson's is how do we keep our brain cells alive? And after thinking about how to keep brain cells alive, I came up with the three-legged stool theory. One theory that I developed, and people can develop their own theories or adopt mine. One leg of the three-legged stool has to do with diet, another has to do with exercise, and another has to do with medication or modern medicine. And we should consent and all agree upon the admonition that medicine is pretty amazing stuff technologically. It's lessens our symptoms and makes the quality of our life all the more better. But it does absolutely nothing to keep brain cells alive or enhance the structural integrity of the brain cells. The only thing that it does is sully the symptoms. And the only way that we can keep the brain cells alive, from my research at the present time, is by diet and exercise. And exercise is a huge component of my daily routine. I get up in the morning and I get on an elliptical machine and I restore all normal signaling in the brain by inducing a runner's high, or I should say an aerobics high, and then left with a sense of well-being for the rest of the day, because it leaves me with a feeling of power and hope, because I realize that I have the ability to change my own mood, my own attitude, my own way of living, and gives me the idea that I can lead a joyful life. And I can't emphasize enough how important PD Connect has been for me. Before I do, PD Connect was founded by Dr. Lisa Uy and Steph and Lisa, and they've given up their lives to help people with Parkinson's. And Dr. Uy in particular has reduced the science of Parkinson's down to motion, and understands how to keep people moving in a way that creates new neural pathways in the brain. So essentially, what I'm doing is a 1-2 punch. My my own elliptical machine experience is flooding my brain with blood and oxygen to my brain cells. And I call my brain cells my kids. Every morning I'm on the elliptical machine feeding my kids with blood and oxygen. And before the pandemic, I used to go to 24-hour fitness every day. And all the people behind the desk would say, "Oh no, here's Jerry's. He's here to feed his kids." And they caught on early on that I knew that they were crying for something very important. Like any of our children, we have to feed them every day and make sure that they survive. But that's just the one part of it, the 1-2 punch. And the second part of the punch is PD Connect, where they attempt to build new neural pathways in the brain so that we can get the neurotransmission of electrical chemical information to the muscle. It's kind of like the analogy that I would use is that in California there's a highway called 101, and sometimes it gets crowded and cluttered and with traffic jam. So people take 280, which is parallel to 101, if they're going from Burlingame to San Jose. And this is exactly what Lisa and Steph are doing. They're creating new neural pathways to the brain so that our transmission of our chemical reactions under our neurotransmitters can effectively move our muscles in a more adequate and fluid way. Feel free to interrupt it at any time if you have any questions, because this is something that is part of your experience as well. But when I was litigating brain injury cases, I often found it very important and helpful for the jury to understand a little bit about the brain so that they could put it into the injury into context. And so I've developed a few questions that will help us understand the brain. And first question is, how many brain cells do we have? If anybody has any ideas about how many brain cells, unmute and tell me. Well, I'll tell you. We have 100 billion.
Like,
100 billion brain cells. And what is the purpose of a brain cell? To pass information to other like-minded brain cells. What information does it pass? Well, that depends. Upon what does it depend? The particular part of the brain to where it has evolved over the millions of years. And that's where modern science has attempted to organize the brain. And the brain is organized into 3 or 4 different lobes, as well as the cerebellum and the brainstem. And the frontal lobe controls attention, motivation, emotional, social, sexual control. And remember that part, motivation. Frontal lobe controls motivation, and it also controls problem solving and decision making. And temporal lobe controls the short-term memory, receptive language, language comprehension, aggressive behavior. And parietal lobe controls spatial orientation, awareness of body parts, hand-eye coordination, and tactile perception. And the occipital lobe controls visual perception and processing. And the cerebellum controls movement almost exclusively. It's where we have a new learned motor skills. You know, it's important to understand that the brain consists mainly of more than half of its brain cells are in the cerebellum, as well as the other parts of the motor cortex. And throughout our history, our evolution, it was very, very important that that movement play a very key role in our survival. And my brother Paul, who was an immunologist, headed a department of immunology at a major medical school, told me that what I'm doing is when I'm inducing a runner's high in the morning, is I'm tricking the brain. I'm tricking the brain into believing that there's a problem afoot, or rather a flaw. Because most of our evolution has been spent running away from things like things with sharp teeth and poisonous fangs. And we have gotten past that, but we also have an opportunity to think of Parkinson's as the most modern predator that where we still need movement. And we just have to think of it in terms of saving the children, saving the brain cells. And the brainstem controls the autonomic nervous system, heart rate, breathing, temperature, arousal, and sleep regulation. So the modern science is very clear in compartmentalizing the various brain cells in different places of the brain. And how is information passed? It's passed electrochemically via a neurotransmitter. And last I checked, the number of neurotransmitters discovered by science is in the hundreds. And we usually think of endorphin when we induce a runner's high. We think of endorphin giving us that good feeling. Well, there's actually just dozens and dozens of neurotransmitters that work in concert. And what happens when the brain cell dies? Information doesn't get passed. And that's what's happening in Parkinson's. Brain cells are dying. That's why there's a clarion call in my book to keep brain cells alive. And we're the only ones with control over how to do that by doing diet and exercise. And diet is so important because diet is in the new generation will be considered just as important as exercise. And I tell people that people ask what type of diet they should eat, and I tell them to go to the internet and type in good foods for the brain, and they'll find salmon, berries like blackberries, strawberries, blueberries, eggs, nuts, seeds, avocados, dark green leafy vegetables, especially broccoli, Brussels sprouts, spinach and chard, sweet potatoes, beets, water, garlic, limes and lemons, bananas, beet greens, flax seeds, chia, almonds, green tea. And I thought that that was a good start to get people thinking in terms of what they should be eating in the diet that they should subscribe to. But after being exposed to Dr. Laura Mishley, who's the guru on diet and Parkinson's, Mishley is spelled, if I get this right, Mischley, and Laurie is spelled Laurie. And she has done a painstaking job at getting data on Parkinson's patients and exposing that processed foods are the part of the problem in the advancement of Parkinson's disease. And her work is corroborated by a Dr. Robert Lustig, who also believes that processed foods and sugars are an anathema to keeping brain cells alive. And so what I learned is that well, first of all, good foods for the brain is also good foods for the heart, good foods for the liver, good foods for the stomach. I mean, it's all kind of interconnected. And but I found out that being exposed to Dr. Mishley and Dr. Lustig, that the more important question, rather than what are the good foods for the brain, is to go to the internet and type in bad foods for the brain. And this is where people get mad at me because they realize that they're a co-conspirator to the death of their own brain cells by the food that they eat. And it's just, I can't emphasize enough how important diet is. Because there's many different ways to a brain cell can die. Too numerous to mention all of them here, and probably impossible because we still don't know about how some brain cells die. But what we do know is that the mitochondria, which is the power station of the brain cell, is incredibly fickle, and according to Dr. Lustig, totally dependent on exercise for its survival. And I can actually point to the part of the book where he says that, if anybody is interested. But the mitochondria combines oxygen and glucose to cause the spark or the fuel that keeps the brain cell alive. And I've got a theory that we hear a lot about the alpha-synuclein protein getting all clumped up and causing Lewy bodies, which is another way that brain cells can die. But I'm convinced that the mitochondria adds to that because it doesn't provide the energy necessary to keep a free flow of neurotransmission going on in the brain. And also oxygen is a key to making sure that the brain cell survives. I mean, there's actually a special word. They call it hypoxia, which means death of brain cells from lack of oxygen. And the membrane is also important for regulating temperature. And the astrocytes, the glia cells that provide food for the brain cells, sometimes become inactive. In other words, there's a lot of different ways the brain cell can die, but it's so unnecessary. And in certain people, if they just are willing to change their lifestyle to incorporate diet and exercise and change, and not to do it casually or when it's a matter of convenience, but to do it definitely on a day-to-day basis. The great Dave Iverson, who was the last month's speaker, said that Parkinson's doesn't take a day off, and neither do we. I mean, we got to feed the kids every day, and it is incumbent upon us to make sure that they get fed the proper diet so that they can survive. And when we think in those terms, it's not as hard to change our diet regimen and our exercise regimen. And I can always tell when a person is going to not be a good candidate for exercise when they refer to exercise as a necessary evil. I mean, they're not going to have the staying power. You somehow have to realize that exercise is a necessary blessing to keep the kids alive, to keep the brain cells alive. And what part of the brain cell is affected by Parkinson's? Or what part of the brain is affected by Parkinson's? I have a quote here from Dr. Peter Attia, Attia, who wrote a book called Outlive, The Science of Art and Longevity. And he says, Parkinson's disease is associated with the degeneration of the dopamine-producing neurons within one of the movement centers of the midbrain called the substantia nigra, which can occur as a result of genetics, environmental toxic exposure, or other factors. Dopamine-producing neurons within this region are important for both allowing intentional movements and preventing unintentional movements. Let me reread that last part. For both allowing intentional movements and preventing unintentional movements. And that explains why the neurotransmitter dopamine is both excitatory and inhibitory, because in one sense we're trying to inhibit movement, in another sense we're trying to excite it and make movement possible. And dopamine is one of the few neurotransmitters that's both excitatory and inhibitory. And
Hey, Jerry.
Yes.
Hey, this is Greg. Hey, I have a question that's, I think, somewhat related, but since we're talking about the brain. You mentioned prefrontal cortex. How does one use a prefrontal cortex, rather than other parts of the brain? What's
Well,
your
that's a good
experience?
question. I can't answer it, but unfortunately, I have expert witnesses that can answer this question if I can rely upon my index system and go to the part that talks about prefrontal cortex and go to the book called Spark by John Rady. He's at Harvard. And if you have money to buy only one book, I would recommend you buy Spark and not my book, because Spark is the neuroscience of exercise in the brain. And I treat it like my Bible. But I think he talks about that very question in a different context, though. I think he talks about it in terms of depression. If I remember correctly, and I remember this so succinctly because it's in my book, this particular page. He said, in talking about depression, the beauty of exercise is that it attacks the problem from both directions at the same time. That would be the depression. It gets us moving naturally, which stimulates the brainstem and gives us more energy, passion, interest, and motivation. We feel more vigorous from above. In the prefrontal cortex, exercise shifts our self-concept by adjusting all the chemicals I've mentioned, including serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, BDNF, and VEGF, and so on. And unlike many antidepressants, exercise doesn't selectively influence anything. It adjusts the chemistry of the entire brain to restore normal signaling. It frees up the prefrontal cortex so that we can remember the good things and break out of the pessimistic patterns of depression. It also serves as proof that we can take the initiative to change something. The paradigm holds true for exercise's effect on mood in general, regardless of whether we're depressed or coping with some nagging symptoms, or even if we're just having a bad day. So I'm not sure that answers your question directly, but it does give you an idea of how exercise affects the prefrontal cortex. And see, that's one of the sad things about what I do, because getting people to understand that they have control over their own lives and just getting them to do the exercise and change their frame of reference and frame of mind. And that's why I really believe that Steph and Lisa are such a vital, important part of the human experience, at least my human experience, because they turn me around, and they have so built a community of love and health and humanity that I see them every day on my internet, which everybody in this on this Zoom call is welcome to participate in. They have people from all over the country, if not all over the world, participating on a daily basis. Maybe not a great time to plug into them because they're planning a trip, but they are going to try to do their classes from the road. And it might be a good time to, in order to express how great a community I feel they have shared with us, by introducing into evidence a song written by Scott, which encapsulates the beauty of Lisa and Steph. And it's just a couple minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minute song, but it'll give you an idea of how special PD Connect is. Now, a 1 and a 2 and a...
All right, here we go. Hang on. I'm going to share this. Okay, we're gonna just, thank
Lisa
you.
is on the left and Steph is on the right.
Which one am I?
You're Lisa.
I'm Lisa,
Yeah.
right. Here we go, folks. Written, produced, orchestrated, directed, sung,
played all by
mixed by our very
our
own
very own
Scott.
Scott.
Here
Stark.
goes.
Gifted musician.
We did something special for you all. So this is an opportunity for you to enjoy and sing along.
Sometimes when I'm feeling blue, I look out at the world and I don't know what to do. But then I zoom in on the middle of the day, and PD Connect makes my blues go away.
One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Cross jacks, jumping jacks, straighten your backs. Jump rope, lots of hope, cardio snacks. Crunch your shoulders, no automation. Now it's rotation, rotation, rotation. Keep our sights lined straight as an arrow, making things hot with wide, wide, narrow, narrow. Open the vault and raise your sights. Stir up the pot into wana, wana bites. I'm so glad to be alive, 'cause PD Connect shows me how to thrive. I'm so glad to be right here, 'cause Steph and Lisa make me have no fear. I'm so glad to be alive, 'cause PD Connect shows me how to thrive. I'm so glad to be right here, 'cause Steph and Lisa make me have no fear. 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 9 o'clock hopping, and then it's pretend supermarket shopping. We build neural pathways that everyone savors and make up lists with ice cream flavors. I'm so
Enjoy and sing along. Enjoy and sing along.
One,
Enjoy and sing along.
4, 5,
Enjoy and sing along.
7, 8.
I'm so glad to be alive. We get all the love and laughter, and there's still Wednesday dialogue after. Special guests are doing their part, but Steph and Lisa bring it from the heart.
I'm sure you're all clapping, even though you're. But that was written and produced by Scott. He's a genuinely great musician and part of the PD Connect family. You know, part of the presentation being made by a lawyer is kind of dangerous because there's usually no stopping me. But I do want to make sure that people understand that we are loved by people that take care of us. And oftentimes caregivers are in the background suffering sometimes more than the actual Parkinson's patient because they love us so much. And part of my book was there's half a page written and dedicated to the caregivers. And the Jim, part of the Parkinson's community, was so impressed he brought a copy with him today, and he would like to read it if he's available to do that.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. I was reading Jerry's book and came to a portion of it that as I read it, I slowed down. You know how when you read sometimes and you just start to feel what's going on. By the time I finished this second paragraph, I just stopped and said, I got to do that again. I went back and slowly went through it. So the scene is that the court is examining Dr. Marks, one of his characters. And what Dr. Marks said was, for some reason, he thought it was important for all to hear that intense aerobic exercise, intent on keeping brain cells alive, can easily be perceived as an act of love. Exercise can be perceived as an act of love, basically. And then the court asked Dr. Marks, did you hear anything else? And what he also said was, he, in all earnestness, felt that those with Parkinson's, treated by those who love them and take care of them, they would exact any means under their control in order to stay as healthy as possible for as long as possible, in order to soften the sorrow of those whose devotion they probably would freely admit they do not deserve, but nonetheless, by the grace of God, have been blessed. That's remembering our caregivers and groups of loved ones that love us.
Jim, will you tell us what page that was that you were reading from? Somebody asked.
It's the end of chapter 11, and it's page,
It's page
103, 104.
103, 104. Thank you.
And see, we're
Exercise is an act of love. It's a beautiful thought.
Thank you, Jim, for reading that. And, you know, which makes me, what confuses me most is that convincing people that diet and exercise is scientifically the way to go, and creating healthy brain cells and keeping brain cells alive. What really confuses me is that even though we know this, and I talk to groups all over the country, you know, with my head bobbing and all, you know, just to get people to understand that I've got Parkinson's, but I live a joyous life because I exercise so much and eat the right foods. What makes me confused is that even though people will admit that what I'm saying is true, they won't do anything about it. And that, to me, I'm such a curious guy. I went on a mission to try to figure that out. And that's when I understood that there are certain obstacles that prevent us from doing the right thing in terms of our physical health. And probably many obstacles, but I've narrowed them down to three. One is fear. One is prejudice against exercise. And another is addictions, either drugs or alcohol, or if you listen to Dr. Lustig, food addictions. And what all those three things have in common is that they, if you remember back, when you think about my competing areas of the brain theory, each one of those obstacles are triggered in an area outside the frontal lobe, in the more reptilian part of the brain. And that's important because you can't, the best way I can explain competing areas of the brain is by saying something that Mother Teresa said. She said that you can't hate and love at the same time. Now, she wasn't a neurologist, but she nailed it because hate has to do with the amygdala, a part of the brain that's reptilian in nature. And love has to do with the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. And I mean, you can love and hate at different times, but you can't love and hate at exactly the same time. And if you're having fear, prejudice against exercise, or having an addiction, you can't charge the frontal lobe to which controls, and remember what we said before, I'd come back to it, attention, motivation, and emotional, social, and sexual control. Motivation, we need motivation, and that's what PD Connect does. I would wager to bet that any of you who is feeling blue or down, just give Lisa and Steph 5 minutes of your time, and they completely turn you around. I have a few questions myself here. What should be our main goal? We all know what that should be, and that is keeping brain cells alive. And what should be our main question for our doctors now that we know that? And this way you can appear to be really smart too when you're talking to your doctor. You can say, "Doctor, I understand that Parkinson's is caused from a loss of brain cells in the substantia nigra. How, in your opinion, do we best keep those brain cells alive?" And then just sit back. And up until now, 10 years ago, most doctors would probably just say, take your medication. But see, Parkinson's is no longer the disease of your parents, where you just take medications and sit around and wait for bad things to happen. Now the interesting question is how the doctor is going to respond. And how the doctor responds is so enlightening. And most doctors will say exercise now. But the new trend now for doctors that are really in the know is to say diet and exercise, because that's the only two things that can keep the brain cells alive. Because essentially, getting back to the three-legged stool, the medication is dealing with the symptoms of Parkinson's. And I'm not critical with that either, because it's huge technology. I mean, we have people that do the deep brain stimulation surgery and the medications, and I take medications myself, and it lessens the symptoms, and that's so important for people to get by from day to day, and it helps the caregivers as well when they have a loved one that is able to move around a lot more fluidly. But the bottom line is that the only thing that we know of that keeps brain cells alive up to now is diet and exercise. And I hate to sound like a broken record, but I want to really hammer that home, because what I'm trying to do is lessen human suffering. And most people won't listen because as we get older, we get more set in our ways. But when you're staring death in the face, though, people get religion really quickly. And what is the main purpose of dopamine producing neurons? That's kind of like a question, who's buried in Grant's tomb? And the answer is to produce dopamine. And how do we do that? And see, this is the exciting part, because we know how to produce dopamine in the motor parts of the brain that produce dopamine. We just move and exercise. The neurotransmitter dopamine gets released into the prefrontal cortex synapse of the brain cell, and over to the post synaptic receptor of the next brain cell in the line of transmission. And we have the power to do that if we just move. I mean, by moving my hand. And that's why my elliptical machine works well for me, because my problem is when my right hand and my right leg. And I get on, and my movement is such that I can go back and forth with the lever on the elliptical machine 1 time a second. And in 60 seconds, that's 60 movements. in an hour, which is what I stay on for as long as an hour, that's 3,600 movements. And that has to be multiplied times 4 because my right leg, left leg, and left arm are also moving. And I become a machine. And I mean, I'm just amazed at the chemicals that are being elicited in my brain when I do that. I mean, if the government knew what chemicals I'm creating in my brain, they would probably outlaw the elliptical machine. And
Jerry, can you speak to the way you incorporate different types of exercise? This is one of the questions. For example, the elliptical machine exercises used by Lisa and Steph. I'm Steph, online at PD Connect, and daily walking. Can you give us some info on that?
well, if I'm a good boy, I treat myself to a daily walk at the end of the day. And one of the things I really enjoy about Steph and Lisa's class, and I'm not saying that Steph and Lisa are the only game in town. I mean, there's just wonderful, beautiful people throughout the entire country. And I know that there's a lot of people from outside the Bay Area on this presentation. But what I like about Steph and Lisa is they mix it up. They do strength training, they do balance training. Well, they can speak to what they do. Would you like to comment about the different strategies that you use?
Yeah, that's a great question. We like to call it a variety show. But many of those things that you already described, we teach high intensity exercise, we teach dual tasking.
And by the way, it's actually just 2 minutes of distraction.
All
that
you
we
need is 2
minutes of us, and we'll get you out of that negative mindset.
It took me 5 minutes one day, and I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
All right, fair enough. 5 minutes for you. But there are research studies out there that do say it does take approximately 2 minutes to get out of the funk that you might be in. So we aim for those 2 minutes for you. But
we do really try to hammer down on what is Parkinson specific. It's wonderful that you're doing the elliptical work. It's wonderful that you're doing your daily walks, but there are certain things that we know that you need for someone with Parkinson's, and those have to do with, you know, different biomechanical things that I, as a physical therapist, and Steph as a trainer, we combine our knowledge together to give you these exercises. But at the end of the day, it's just like Jerry says, it's about keeping the brain cells alive, and it's about creating those neural pathways and keeping them strong and using that prefrontal cortex. We can do so much with that prefrontal cortex. A lot of times I show up at people's homes and the medication is way off and they are in this very bad state. But for some reason, if I show up, or if you go to the doctor and the doctor says, please walk down the hall, why is it that you can do that? Because you are using your prefrontal cortex. So I like to think of it sometimes as mind over matter, and your mind can absolutely do so many things. So thank you, Jerry, for creating such an easy to understand and read book to help explain this to people.
yes, if you haven't read the book yet, we highly suggest you can get this on Amazon. But also Jerry does a really great way of, he kind of sets the precedence there with vocabulary that you need to know about. So if any of this sounds a little over the top, he kind of sounds like a scientist a little bit more than an attorney right now, but he really does a great way of mapping it out for us. And it's funny. He's funny. He's actually really funny. So, Jerry, did you have anything else that you wanted to share with us, or does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask?
The old clock on the wall says I've been going for an hour. It seems like 5 minutes. Don't get me started.
We love getting you started. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Jerry, it's your old buddy from law school, Rick Baskin.
Hey, Rick, how are you?
Great. I remember the times we'd go jogging in law school. We had a great time.
Yeah, one of the smartest guys I know and one of the best attorneys I know, and he was diagnosed with Parkinson's around the same time I was.
Yeah, that's true. So I have a question. You know, I play music, and when I play music, it seems like I'm more fluid. And I don't know what goes on in my brain. Maybe you can explain that. What happens, you know, it seems very positive because I don't feel balance issues or anything. And I'm fluid. I don't feel the back pain a lot of times when I'm involved in, you know, doing a gig.
Well, you know, maybe Scott can explain that. I mean, you know, I'm not a musician myself, and it's above my pay grade. Do you have any ideas, Scott?
Not really, but it sounds like you sort of get into a state of mind where you're kind of enjoying it, and it's like a runner's high or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Lisa, Lisa
and this,
Steph?
yeah, Lisa, this is Lisa. And we also know that music, it accesses different parts of your brain. It just does. Areas that we don't normally get to when we're exercising or walking or reading or something else. So music has this way of being able to just really, touch areas of your brain that you're not normally used to all at one time. So keep up the great work. And we also use music a lot. We call it audio motor entrainment. And that's when we use music to help you move and do the motor skills in a certain way.
I've heard people say that music is often like praying, and meditation is not far off. That's the next thing that we've got to think about too, is meditation behind diet and exercise. But I know that when I write, I go into my deepest identity and get into relationship with something very spiritual and wholesome inside. And I think that that probably has to do with making a connection in your orbital frontal cortex, where we inculcate social values. And, I suspect that musicians kind of experience the same thing. To get, I know it's certainly a frontal lobe thing, because it's way far away from the reptilian brain, because it has to do with evolving, and musicians are right on the top of the chart for evolution.
Well, thank you. And if I might put in a plug, July 20th, Saturday, I'm playing in Sausalito with a Taste of Rome with a blues jazz band.
And what do you play?
Harmonica.
Yeah.
So you come, Jerry. I haven't seen you in so many years. It'd be great to see you there.
I haven't changed a bit. Or I guess I've been outed. You see my picture. I'm on the screen.
You haven't changed. Thank you so much.
Any other questions that anyone has there? No other questions here. We have a couple questions in the chat that could take another 2 or 3 hours. But do you think diet is specific for PD, or is it different for different people? Oh, sounds like I was.
I think, I'm not, the simple answer is I don't have a clue. That's a question for Dr. Laura Mishley, but I would take a stab at it and say that we have so many things in common. It's just being part of the human family. And one of it is our ability to commute with nature. And I think natural foods are really important to understand in the context of what our body really desires. I mean, processed foods and sugar have a terrible effect on the gut and the liver, according to Dr. Lustig, and is the cause of most of our physical health problems in our country. And, I would guess that all natural diets far outweigh the anything else that we could put into our system. So I would vote yes, that we have that in common, and that you should really invest a lot of thought into reading Dr. Lustig's book, Metabolical, and going to Laura Mishley's website to learn more about all the circumstantial evidence that she was able to produce in her clinical studies, which clearly show and prove that people with a good diet have a slower rate of Parkinson's progression than people that kind of. But I'm not here to tell people what to eat. I mean, all I'm here to do is to let people go into their diet with their eyes open. I mean, if you want to eat sugar and processed foods and all that stuff, that's fine. I mean, but you got to understand that you're killing brain cells along the way. So it's a question of whether or not the pleasure you get in stimulating the taste buds outweighs the health benefits of stimulating the brain cell. with good foods. Very well put, Jerry.
Thank you, Jerry. We know that the topic of diet is quite a controversial one, but we do remind people that diet can be different for all of us. I mean, if you're allergic to fish, we don't suggest you eat fish, that kind of thing. But also a good reminder is, and Jerry mentioned, if you're eating natural foods, this is great. For those of us that have a difficult time cutting back on certain things, we're not saying eliminate all these things. When you Google what's bad for the brain, if you're going to eliminate those all at once, that's a lot. That's overwhelming. When you Google what is good for the brain and you start eating more and more of those foods, then naturally you'll stop eating some of those that are bad for you. So we say if you can target as many of those really good for you foods, maybe you won't be eating as much sugar or eating as much dairy or any of those other things that we know are not so great for the brain. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Jerry. Thank you all for being here. We love Jerry. We love the book. We love you all. We're so happy that you're all here with us and supporting Jerry from near and far and supporting ourselves. Just a reminder again, we are a nonprofit. We teach exercise and education for people with Parkinson's virtually, wherever you are, wherever we are. And we'd love for you to join us at any time. Check us out at www.pd-connect.org.
Don't forget the dash.
Don't forget the dash. We'd love to see you whenever that may be. Thank you so much, Jerry. Thanks to all
Any
your friends
final
for
comments
coming. Any
from
final
Jerry?
comments?
Thank you. How does the more? I want everybody to wake up tomorrow morning with this joke. How does the morning dawn get along? How does the morning dawn get along?
How does the morning dawn get along?
It makes do.
Okay.
Like people with
That's-
Parkinson's, we make do.
You make do.
We make
That's good.
do.
That is
That
good.
was great.
One last thing. I can prove to you, each one of you, that there's good in the world. I know that there's a lot of bad news throughout the world, but I can prove to you that there's good in the world by having you do one thing. And that's look in the mirror.
That's sweet.
Very sweet.
We love that.
Is there a picture of you in our mirror?
We have a little picture of Jerry up on the top of one of the mirrors. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. I like that. All right. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Jerry, so much. We'd love to have you back for your next book or even to continue this conversation about this book. It's lovely and you're lovely. And thank you all. We'll enjoy the rest of your day or your evening, and we'll see you on the flip side. Anything else, Lise?
That's it.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
We'll see
you.
next